The arrival of the impossible, the crimson moons of Kelth, cast eerie shadows across the obsidian courtyard as Captain Marcus Chen stepped off the diplomatic transport. His boots clicked against the polished stone, each step echoing through the towering spires that surrounded the Keltharian War Academy. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and something else, something metallic that made his nose wrinkle. Captain Chen, Ambassador Thane's voice rumbled like distant thunder. The Keltharian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his bronze skin marked with ceremonial scars that told the story of countless battles. Welcome to the heart of trials. Few outsiders have ever been permitted to enter these sacred grounds. Marcus nodded respectfully, adjusting the collar of his formal diplomatic uniform. At 35, he had seen enough conflict zones to know when he was walking into something dangerous. The human diplomatic mission to Kelth had been years in the making, but nobody had expected this particular twist in negotiations. I appreciate the honor, Ambassador, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. Though, I have to admit, when your government requested a demonstration of human resilience, I wasn't expecting it to be quite so personal. Thane's 4 eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. Commander Voss insisted on testing your species personally. She has never encountered humans before, and her curiosity about your psychological makeup has become something of an obsession. As if summoned by her name, a figure emerged from the shadows of the Academy's main entrance. Commander Lyra Voss moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her midnight blue skin seeming to absorb the moonlight. She wore form-fitting combat armor that left her muscular arms bare, revealing intricate tattoos that spiraled from her shoulders to her fingertips. Her silver hair was braided with metal threads that chimed softly as she walked, but it was her eyes that made Marcus's breath catch. They were the color of molten gold, and they held the weight of 1,000 victories and 10,000 defeats. When she looked at him, he felt as though she was seeing straight through his soul. So, her voice was like silk wrapped around steel. You are the human who thinks he can survive a night with me. Marcus had read the files. Commander Lyra Voss, known throughout the galaxy as the Death Maiden of Kelth. In her 20 years as a warrior, she had never lost a single combat trial. More importantly for his current situation, she had never allowed anyone to survive her psychological evaluation trials. The bodies weren't the issue. Keltharian healing technology could repair almost any physical damage. It was the minds that broke. Every challenger who entered her chambers emerged either catatonic or screaming. I don't think anything, Commander, Marcus replied with a slight smile. I'm just here to learn about your culture and hopefully build some bridges between our species. Lyra circled him slowly, her golden eyes never leaving his face. Bridges, she repeated, tasting the word. 47 warriors have attempted. My trials. Kroger berserkers who knew no fear. Zentani mystics who could manipulate reality itself. Vorthan assassins who had killed kings. She stopped directly in front of him. All of them begged for death before dawn. Well, Marcus said, his smile widening slightly, I guess we'll see if humans are any different. The first phase of the trial began in Lyra's private combat arena, a circular chamber lined with weapons from a dozen worlds. The walls were scarred from centuries of battles, and the floor was stained with substances Marcus preferred not to identify. Choose your weapon, Lyra commanded, gesturing to the vast array of blades, energy weapons, and exotic armaments. Marcus walked slowly around the room, examining the options. He paused at a section containing earth weapons that had somehow made their way to this distant world. His hand hovered over a combat knife, then moved to what looked like a modified assault rifle. Finally, he reached for something completely unexpected. A simple wooden staff? Lyra's eyebrows rose. You choose a training weapon? I choose adaptability, Marcus replied, testing the staff's weight and balance. This can be a weapon, a tool, a lever, or a shield, depending on what I need. Without warning, Lyra launched herself at him, twin-curved blades appearing in her hands as if by magic. Marcus barely managed to get the staff up in time to block her first strike. The impact sent shockwaves up his arms, but he rolled with the force instead of fighting it. The battle that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Lyra fought like a force of nature, her attacks coming from impossible angles with inhuman speed. But instead of trying to match her strength or speed, Marcus began to adapt. When she came in high, he went low. When she pressed forward, he gave ground and used her momentum against her. 20 minutes into the combat, something strange happened. Lyra began to slow down, not from exhaustion, but from confusion. Every time she thought she had figured out Marcus's fighting style, he changed. When she adapted to his defensive tactics, he switched to offense. When she countered his aggressive moves, he became evasive. "What are you doing?" she demanded, breathing hard for the first time in years. "Learning," Marcus replied, sweat dripping from his face but his voice calm. "Every move you make teaches me something new about how you think." For the first time in her life, Lyra found herself fighting an opponent who became more dangerous the longer the battle lasted. It wasn't that Marcus was becoming stronger or faster. He was becoming smarter. He was studying her, adapting to her patterns, turning her own expertise against her. The combat phase ended when Marcus managed to trap both of her blades with his staff and sweep her legs, sending her to the ground. Instead of pressing his advantage, he immediately stepped back and offered her his hand. "Good match," he said, still smiling despite the dozen minor cuts decorating his arms. Lyra stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment before accepting. No one had ever helped her up after a fight. No one had ever smiled at her during combat. No one had ever treated her like an equal rather than a monster to be feared or defeated. "You fight strangely," she said, studying his face as he pulled her to her feet. "I fight like a human," Marcus replied. "We're not the strongest or the fastest, but we're really good at figuring things out as we go." The second phase of the trial took place in what Lyra called the Chamber of Truths. The room was completely white, filled with advanced holographic projectors that could create any environment or scenario. This was where the psychological evaluation truly began. "This phase will test your mind," Lyra explained as they entered the chamber. "I will probe your fears, your weaknesses, your breaking points. Most species have very predictable psychological patterns. We'll see how predictable humans are." The first scenario materialized around them. Marcus was back on Earth, but it was Earth as it might be after a nuclear war. The sky was ash gray, the buildings were ruins, and the silence was broken only by the wind howling through empty streets. Holographic bodies lay scattered around them, including what appeared to be Marcus's family. Marcus walked through the devastation calmly, examining the details of the holographic projection. He knelt beside the image of what looked like his sister, then stood and looked directly at Lyra. "Impressive detail work," he said conversationally. "The radiation burns are very realistic. Though I should mention that my sister lives on Mars now, so this scenario is already off to a shaky start." Lyra frowned. The fear of planetary destruction was a universal terror that affected every species she had tested. "You feel nothing, seeing your world destroyed?" "I feel sad," Marcus replied honestly. "But I also know it's not real. And even if it were real, standing here being afraid wouldn't help me fix it." The scenario shifted. Now they were in a prison cell, and Marcus was chained to a wall. Keltharian guards were approaching with instruments of torture that made Lyra's stomach turn even though she had designed them herself. Marcus examined the chains holding him, tested their strength, and then looked at the approaching torturers with professional interest. "Are these historically accurate Keltharian interrogation techniques? I'm actually quite interested in the cultural development of your species' military practices." The scenario dissolved. Lyra was staring at Marcus with something approaching disbelief. "You're supposed to be terrified." "Why?" Marcus asked genuinely. "It's not real, and even if it were, being terrified wouldn't help me escape or endure it. Fear is just information telling me something might be dangerous. Once I have that information, the fear itself isn't very useful." Scenario after scenario played out around them. Marcus, trapped in a collapsing building, remained calm and looked for escape routes. Marcus, facing a horde of monsters, started analyzing their movement patterns to find weaknesses. Marcus, watching his friends die, maintained his composure and began planning how to prevent future losses. With each failed attempt to break him, Lyra's frustration grew. But it was mixed with something else, something she had never felt before. Curiosity that had nothing to do with combat or dominance. How? She finally asked as the 100th scenario dissolved around them. How do you maintain such control? Marcus sat down on the white floor of the chamber, looking tired but not defeated. It's not control. Exactly. It's perspective. Humans have a saying. This too shall pass. Good times, bad times, terrifying times, they all pass eventually. So, when something bad happens, part of me is already thinking about what comes after. But don't you fear death? Pain? Loss? Of course I do, Marcus replied. But I also know that fear without action is just suffering without purpose. So I try to skip the suffering part and go straight to figuring out what to do about whatever's scaring me. For the first time in hours, Lyra sat down as well. You speak as if you faced many terrifying situations. Marcus nodded. I was a combat medic before I became a diplomat. I have seen a lot of things that would give most people nightmares. But I also learned that the scariest situations often bring out the best in people. Humans have this weird habit of becoming more themselves when everything goes wrong. As the night wore on, something fundamental began to shift between them. Lyra continued her psychological probes, but she found herself becoming more interested in understanding Marcus than in breaking him. His responses to her tests weren't just unexpected. They were illuminating. He wasn't fearless. He was something much more intriguing. He was hopeful that when Marcus faced the scenario of losing everyone he loved, he didn't deny the pain. Instead, he talked about how you would honor their memory. When confronted with his own mortality, he didn't claim to be unafraid of death. Instead, he discussed what he hoped to accomplish before dying and what kind of legacy he wanted to leave. You think about the future constantly, Lyra observed as dawn approached. Guilty as charged, Marcus admitted. Humans are really good at imagining things that haven't happened yet. It's one of our defining characteristics. Even when the future looks dark. Especially then, Marcus said, with that same smile that had been puzzling her all night. Dark times don't last, but humans who refuse to give up hope usually do. The dawn of understanding as the first light of dawn began to filter through the chamber's crystalline windows. Lyra realized she was facing something unprecedented. Not only had Marcus survived the night, but he had somehow turned her trials into a conversation. More disturbingly, she found herself looking forward to his responses rather than trying to destroy his mind. One final test, she announced, though. Her voice lacked its earlier edge of anticipated. The chamber around them shifted one last time, becoming a perfect replica of Lyra's own worst memory. They stood on the ash-covered battlefield of Corvain Prime, where a younger Lyra knelt beside the broken body of her mentor, Commander Lex. The scene was so realistic, Lyra could smell the smoke and taste the bitter wind that had blown across the killing fields 20 years ago. This is my memory, she said quietly. The day I learned that caring about someone was a weakness that could be exploited. Marcus looked around the devastated landscape, taking in the scattered weapons and the bodies of Keltharian warriors. His expression was serious now, devoid of the gentle humor that had characterized most of their interactions. You were young, he observed, looking at the holographic version of Lyra who wept over her fallen teacher. I was foolish, Lyra corrected harshly. I hesitated in battle because I was afraid Lex would be hurt. That hesitation cost 37 lives, including hers. Marcus walked closer to the scene, studying the younger Lyra with compassionate eyes. How old were you? 16 standard years. A child, Marcus said simply. A child who cared about her teacher. A child who learned that caring was a luxury that warriors cannot afford. Lyra shot back. From that day forward, I never. allowed emotions to cloud my judgment. I became the perfect weapon. Marcus turned to face her, and for the first time all night, his smile was gone. And how has that worked out for you? The question hit Lyra like a physical blow. She had spent 20 years perfecting herself as an instrument of war. 20 years, proving that she was beyond the reach of pain or fear or loss. She was the most feared warrior in the galaxy, the undefeated champion of Kelth. She was also completely alone. I survive, she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Do you? Marcus asked gently. Or do you just exist? The holographic memory began to shift, but not because Lyra was controlling it. Somehow, Marcus was influencing the projection, adding elements from his own experience. The battlefield of Corvain Prime became a field hospital on some distant world where younger Marcus worked frantically to save wounded soldiers. I was a medic during the Centauri conflict, Marcus explained as they watched his holographic counterpart lose patient after patient to injuries that were too severe to treat. I watched 17 people die in my arms during one night. Good people, friends. Lyra watched the scene unfold, seeing the pain in the younger Marcus's eyes, as each patient slipped away despite his efforts. How did you continue? I almost didn't, Marcus admitted. I was ready to resign from the service to find some quiet. Job where I'd never have to watch anyone die again. What changed? The scene shifted again, showing Marcus sitting beside the bed of a wounded soldier who was expected to die before morning. Instead of giving up, the younger Marcus was reading to the patient, telling stories, making jokes, doing everything he could to keep the man's spirits up. I realized that caring about people wasn't my weakness, Marcus said as they watched the soldier recover against all odds. It was my strength. The moment I stopped caring, I stopped being useful to anyone. The holographic memory dissolved, leaving them standing in the plain white chamber again. But something had changed. Lyra was looking at Marcus not as a test, subject or a puzzle to be solved, but as someone who might actually understand her. You think I should have continued to care? She said. Even after what happened on Corvain Prime. I think, Marcus said carefully, that the universe lost something valuable when you decided that emotions were a weakness. And gained the most effective warrior in the galaxy, Lyra countered. Did it? Marcus asked. Or did it gain someone who's so afraid of being hurt again that she hurts others first? The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Lyra had built her entire identity around being the perfect warrior, the unconquerable force that others feared to face. But Marcus was suggesting that her greatest strength was actually her greatest limitation. Every person who enters these trials, Marcus continued, they're not really fighting you. They're fighting their own fear of you. But that fear exists because you've decided that being feared is safer than being understood. Understanding is a luxury. Lyra repeated the phrase that had guided her for 20 years. No, Marcus said firmly. Understanding is a tool. The more you understand about your opponents, your allies, your environment, the more effective you become. But you can't understand others if you don't understand yourself. The chamber around them began to brighten as the sons of Kelth rose higher in the sky. According to tradition, the trial should have ended at dawn with either Marcus's surrender or his complete psychological breakdown. Instead, they were having the most honest conversation Lyra had experienced in decades. What do you see when you look at me? She asked suddenly. Marcus considered the question seriously. I see someone who's incredibly strong, but who's convinced herself that strength means being alone. I see someone who's so afraid of making the same mistake twice that she stopped taking risks altogether. And I see someone who's forgotten that the best warriors aren't the ones who never get hurt. They're the ones who get hurt and keep fighting anyway. Lyra felt something crack inside. Her chest, some wall she had built 20 years ago, beginning to crumble. You make it sound simple. It's not simple at all, Marcus replied. It's probably the hardest thing anyone can do. But it's also the most important. The doors to the chamber opened, and Ambassador Thane entered with a group of Keltharian officials. They had come to collect Marcus's body, or what remained of his sanity, but they stopped short when they saw both figures standing calmly in the center of the room. Commander Voss? Thane's voice held a note of confusion. Has the trial concluded? Lyra looked at Marcus, then at the assembled officials. For 20 years, she had ended these trials the same way, with her opponent broken and herself unchanged. But everything about this night had been different. The trial has concluded, she announced. Captain Chen has got tasked. A murmur of shock ran through the group of officials. No one had ever passed Lyra's trials. No one had ever even survived them with their mind intact. Furthermore, Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger, I recommend that the High Council approve the human diplomatic proposal immediately. This species has something we need to learn from. And what might that be? Thane asked. Lyra looked at Marcus one more time, seeing him not as a test subject or an enemy, but as someone who had shown her a different way to be strong. Hope, she said simply as the group of officials escorted them from the chamber. Marcus fell into step beside Lyra. The trial was over, but something new was beginning. So, he said, that familiar smile returning to his face. What happens now? Now, Lyra replied, and for the first time in 20 years, she found herself smiling back. I think I need to learn how to be human. Lucky for you, Marcus said. We're pretty good teachers. As they walked through the corridors of the War Academy, past the weapons and the trophies and the monuments to victory, Lyra felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 16 years old. Curiosity about the future. Not the future as a series of battles to be won or enemies to be defeated, but the future as a place where understanding might be possible. Behind them, the chamber that had broken so many minds stood empty, its purpose forever changed. No one had survived the trial night with Commander Lyra Voss, until a human had walked out smiling, and somehow convinced her to smile too. The diplomatic mission to Kelth was officially concluded 6 hours later, with the signing of a comprehensive peace and cooperation treaty. But the real victory wasn't written in any document. It was written in the fact that the most feared warrior in the galaxy had remembered how to hope and sometimes. That's the most human thing of all.